Alrighty, so last week I went over some of my favorite games of 2025, and again, I think 2025 was a pretty solid year for gaming. Although I have to say, I think 2026 is shaping up to be even better, so today's video is all about some of the games that are coming down the pike that should release in 2026, assuming they hit their target okay. But this first entry is definitely going to hit its release target considering it comes out in just a few days, so I would be hugely surprised if it all of a sudden got pushed back, and while it's technically not a new game, it certainly feels new playing it on the Switch too, and that would be Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. And even though I'm old enough to have played the original Final Fantasy VII when it came out at launch, I've mentioned this before, I'm not really an old school Final Fantasy fan, at least not for 7, because my first Final Fantasy was actually Final Fantasy VIII, so even though a lot of people were going completely nuts for this when the remake was first announced a few years back, for me I sort of approached it with a mild curiosity. At least that was until I went to E3 2019 when the hype for this game was at an absolute fever pitch, and that's when I really started to get excited for it, feeling like I was finally getting a second chance to truly appreciate all of the magic people have been enjoying for decades. And like I mentioned in that video about my favorite games from 2025, the RPG genre is not my genre of choice, but every now and then there is a game from that genre that will grab me and absolutely not let go, and when I made that video, I said that I would kind of go on a manic sprint every now and then if an RPG was particularly good, and I went back and looked through all of the footage that I captured from my initial playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Remake from a few years back, and sure enough, after reviewing that footage, I found that I started playing the game a couple of days after its release on April 12th, 2020, and then I beat it just 6 days later on April 18th. So why jump into it again if I've already beaten it, and on a system that will make it look far better? Well, for starters, whenever it comes to RPGs, I do like playing them in the handheld format since you can squeak out a little progress here and there, but also I have already checked out the demo on Switch 2, and the demo progress will carry over into the main game, so there's at least a little bit of incentive to explore it once more, and everything I've played for the demo so far, it is playing super smooth. Not 60 FPS smooth, but a very solid 30 FPS smooth, and it does really feel magical to play a game in that kind of quality that to me was absolutely stunning when I first experienced it on the PS4 back then, but now in a handheld. Which, I know, yeah, I could also play it on the Steam Deck, but there is just something about playing Final Fantasy games on a Nintendo platform, considering that's where the series got its start, and yeah, even though this is a little bit of a curiosity and not exactly a new game for 2026, I'm still excited to check it out, and I'll probably be grabbing this day one. Next up, turning to the survival horror genre, I am very much looking to Resident Evil Requiem dropping on February 27th. And where my history with Final Fantasy has been spotty at best, Resident Evil is a series that I've been consistently invested in since its earliest entries. Although the first one I beat wasn't actually Resident Evil 1, but Resident Evil 2, which I had on the N64 before I had a PlayStation. Speaking of which, quick side note, I was able to pick up a copy of Resident Evil 2 Complete in Box for the N64 the other day, courtesy of Warp Zone, so Darren, if you're watching, thank you again for that. And even though the originals can feel a little bit dated today, and a lot of people would encourage you to just play the remakes, which is totally fine, I still have a lot of love for the originals. But Requiem isn't a remake at all like Resident Evil 2, 3, or 4 that we've gotten recently, rather this is a completely new mainline entry. And I won't even pretend to have a perfect understanding of the Resident Evil timeline since it can get pretty hairy, but I have played through and beaten most of the mainline Resident Evil games with the notable exception of Resident Evil 6, which I am technically working on right now, and also Resident Evil 4 Remake, which I still need to wrap up. But in Requiem, you'll be switching between Grace and fan favorite Leon, both of which have different mechanics, but Grace looks to be the focal point as an FBI tech analyst who's been dispatched to investigate a series of grisly deaths at the Wrenwood Hotel in Raccoon City, the same place her mother died 8 years prior. Which that already throws me off a little bit considering most of us know what happened to Raccoon City at this point, so I'm not real clear on how this is going to work, but I'm real excited nonetheless, if not a little bit worried about the fate of Leon since my boy is looking a little bit haggard considering he's now, well, like in his early 50s, I guess. But I suppose we'll find out for sure what Leon and Grace's fate will ultimately be when it comes out in a little over a month, and I could not be more excited for this one. But now let's look at some sillier, though action-packed horror, with John Carpenter's Toxic Commando coming out on March 26th. And this is a first-person co-op zombie shooter, but crucially one with John Carpenter heavily involved. And I mean, yeah, I love John Carpenter's movies like Halloween, Escape from New York, and The Thing, but I also really like his music, and I'm sure he's going to put his talents in both arenas to good use here for the story and score. And I mean, it looks like a souped-up Left 4 Dead, and from what we've seen in trailers, it looks really promising. Not just by providing hordes of zombies thanks to accidental releases of an entity called, the Sludge God, but what really grabbed my attention was just how polished everything looks even in these early trailers. Guns look super satisfying, performance appears to be rock solid, and the advent of throwing vehicles into the mix seems like a novel addition to the formula. Not to mention it's definitely not taking itself too seriously, which is something I always appreciate in games. And there have been multiple Left 4 Dead clones that have tried to recapture that magic with varying degrees of success, but I'm really hopeful that this one raises the bar while we all collectively wait for Left 4 Dead 3 someday. Next up, turning to some Japanese horror, we have a horror classic that very much is a remake, and it also drops on March 12th, and that would be Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake. And I already talked about the original and that 5 retro horror games to emulate for Halloween video from a few months back, and in the course of retesting it years later and having those memories flood back to me, I remember just how much I struggle with Japanese horror in just the best possible way. I love horror in nearly all of its forms, and while I definitely get startled now and again, most horror movies only really unsettle me in the most surface level way, probably because, well, I play and watch a lot of horror stuff. But Japanese horror in particular absolutely gets under my skin, and Fatal Frame 2 is like the poster child for J-horror done right. And I think most people would consider this to be the best in the series, and while I've only ever finished the original Fatal Frame years ago, I actually have 2 and 3 in my collection physically for the PS2, but never really got around to playing them, or at least beating them when it comes to 2. Or truthfully, maybe I was just too scared to revisit the original on the PS2 because after testing it for that video last month, I gotta say, it spooked me more than a few times. There's just something about ghostly apparitions, specifically as a horror villain, that's scarier to me than zombies, probably because they're more ephemeral by nature and you're never quite sure of the range of their abilities or where they'll pop up compared to like zombies or some kind of a pursuer villain. So to play this with a fresh coat of paint is something I'm very much looking forward to and dreading at the same time, because the only thing that freaks me out more than random ghost faces popping up right in front of me is having to use the camera to get even closer to them. But moving away from a horror second to another game dropping in March just a week later on the 19th is a game that I'm mostly excited for on the back of its art style, which I'm sure is probably true for a lot of people, and that would be Mouse PI for Hire. And my initial thoughts looking at this were probably what a lot of people thought, that, oh okay, this looks like a first-person version of Cuphead. But apparently this 1930s animation style is actually called rubber hose style, which I didn't know until I started researching it for this video. I just always broadly called this look 20s or 30s style animation, but apparently it's called rubber hose animation for the way the characters have bendy, boneless limbs that move very fluidly. It's a 2.5D FPS that definitely appeals to me as a Cuphead fan, and I'm really pumped to get into a bunch of cartoony shootouts as Jack Pepper, the war veteran Private Eye in Mouseburg, investigating corruption. And if you want to learn more about this game beyond just what you've seen from trailers, I would definitely recommend you check out Mouse PI for Hire, a deep dive documentary video that the developers have published on their YouTube channel. It's about 17 minutes long and gives a ton of additional info for anyone who's curious about all of the heart that went into handcrafting a world like this. And not for nothing, but I have a sneaking suspicion this will end up being one of the biggest highlights of 2026, but hey, we'll see when we get a chance to play it in March. Now, turning back to horror for a second, next up is a game from a series that I obviously love, Silent Hill, but it's not a mainline entry, it's kind of a spin-off of sorts, and according to retailer leaks, it could be coming on March 26th, but even if not, I'm sure it will still come in 2026 sometime, and that would be Silent Hill Townfall. And despite the fact that I'm borderline obsessive about Silent Hill, I don't know a ton about this game. I feel like we haven't seen much since it was announced 3 years ago, and honestly I'm okay staying in the dark, or I guess fog, when it comes to this title. And honestly, I might have to, because outside of the Silent Hill fan wiki, there's just not a lot of info out there beyond the fact that it's a spin-off meant to launch an anthology series from various creatives that is co-produced by Annapurna. It's developed by Screenburn, and the only other game they've done that I've played would have been Stories Untold, which I did enjoy my time with it, and this should be more of like an interactive movie-style experience than an actual game, so I would expect a heavy emphasis on storytelling and light puzzle solving, and not like, a full-blown 3D adventure like Silent Hill F or anything like that, obviously. And while I'm not expecting this game will land with the same kind of thunder as something like Silent Hill 2 Remake or Silent Hill F, obviously,
You sure?
I'm still cautiously optimistic about it. I'm really hoping that they tell a great story with this game out of the gate so that it does open the door for other creatives in the industry to take a crack at a Silent Hill title, because I think that's really interesting. But now let's step into big budget action game territory with one of the most recognizable IPs of all time, especially for gamers, with 007 First Light coming on May 27th. And every time I hear about the idea of a new Bond game I get excited, but truthfully, even though there have been tons of Bond games, I've only ever truly loved GoldenEye. Which is probably true for most people, and I know there are some other good ones out there like Nightfire, which is supposed to be a particular bright spot, but after I had a so-so time with some of these subsequent Bond entries and kinda took issue with GoldenEye Rogue Agent on principle, there just wasn't really a lot about the IP to really grab me, but I think 007 Last Light's gonna change that. Because when I first saw the trailer for this, an entirely new take on Bond that was totally divorced from the legacy of GoldenEye, it felt like a breath of fresh air. And it looks to be nailing all of the elements that would give Bond a great return to form. Super polished, stealth action, fast cars, gadgets, and yeah, this is quietly becoming one of my most anticipated games of the year, and I really hope IO knocks it out of the park with this one. Granted, I don't know that including Lenny Kravitz was wholly necessary, but whatever, if it's a good game, it's a good game, and I'm definitely pumped to check it out. And speaking of iconic heroes, albeit in LEGO form this time, I'm super looking forward to LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight coming out on May 27th. Now sadly this game does not have any online co-op, which I was kind of hoping for, but I'm still really pumped for it just as a single player adventure, or I guess local couch co-op, which I think is supported in this game, mostly on the strength of the fact that it is basically an Arkham game in everything but visual identity. And from everything we've seen from the trailer, it looks like it cribs from all over the Dark Knight's history, from the Keaton era to Matt Reeves' The Batman, and I absolutely love that DC is cool with this sort of silly fun with their characters. But this does look to be a little bit more engaging than your typical LEGO game, and again, it does look to be just like a straight up Arkham game in everything but, well, visual style. Speaking of which, that's one of the things I love most about this, is that in all of the close-up shots of the LEGO bricks, they appear to have a similar level of detail to the LEGO movies, where it's not just like pristine LEGO bricks, but rather each one has character like dust or visible lines from the injection molding or fingerprints that you can see. So as a fan of Batman and LEGO, and pretty much loving every time those two things are combined, I can't wait to play through this one and enjoy Cape Crusading through an open world LEGO Gotham. But the real superhero game that I am most excited for in 2026, which sadly still only has like a nebulous fall 2026 release window, would be Insomniac's Wolverine. And I still feel a little bit bad for Insomniac after someone leaked a bunch of gameplay a while back, but hey, now they've released some updated gameplay footage of the polished end result, and man, they are just nailing Wolverine so far. But it's not just that I'm excited for a hyper-violent Wolverine game with modern Mortal Kombat levels of brutality, but even based on the short bit of voice acting from that most recent trailer, it looks like, maybe unsurprisingly, that they're going to tell a stellar Wolverine story that really explores the character. And as an old school fan who grew up watching the X-Men cartoon way before X-Men 97 was a thing, back then Wolverine was my favorite character before, well, eventually getting dethroned by Nightcrawler and Daredevil. And I just couldn't be more thrilled for this one, not to mention Insomniac have already confirmed that Spider-Man and Wolverine exist in the same Insomniac universe, known as Universe 1048, so you know, fingers crossed that Pete or Miles make an appearance at some point, even if they're not explicitly teaming up from a gameplay perspective. And speaking of teaming up, this final entry on the list actually also has kind of a murky release date of just sometime in 2026, which is why I put it last, and it is a Switch 2 exclusive for better or worse, and that would be the Duskbloods. And the Duskbloods is a multiplayer action role-playing game that has PvP and PvE for up to 8 participants. You'll choose from over a dozen blood swarm, which appear to be vampire-like creatures with their own unique abilities to compete across maps. And initially everyone thought during the reveal this just might be a Bloodborne sequel with nods to blood and the moon being present in the trailer, but if this is the closest we're going to get to a Bloodborne sequel for now, I'm cool with it and have a lot of faith in Miyazaki to deliver something that's going to be fun and interesting. Especially because the main focus of these games for me isn't just the fact that they usually have a very distinct visual identity, but just the raw combat and gameplay involved is usually incredibly satisfying. That's why Bloodborne remains my favorite FromSoft game, and I'm really hoping this is at the very least a spiritual successor to that. Now granted, I am a little bit nervous about the structure of this game and would have much preferred just a strong single-player adventure that maybe had some co-op elements, but I'm going to try to withhold judgment for now until I can get the final product in my hands and find out for myself. And beyond these 10 that I've listed, there are a few other games that I'm cautiously optimistic about, but I didn't mention here. Like, I know there is a new Halloween game coming, but I don't know if it will necessarily reach the same heights as something like Dead by Daylight in terms of how much I would be invested in it. I'm also excited for Marvel's 1943 Rise of Hydra, although I feel like we haven't gotten a lot of information on that yet. And also, I think Star Wars Galactic Racer is coming out in 2026, which, as someone who grew up doing a lot of pod racing on the N64, I am excited for this, but I just don't have a lot of info about it yet, so yeah, for now it just gets an honorable mention. So yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Just a quick look at 10 of the games that I'm most looking forward to in 2026. But hey, what about you? Is there anything I left off of this list or something you are very much looking forward to? If so, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. As for what's coming up on the channel, I am currently working on a video about the Steam Machine and some of the ways I'm already preparing for its release, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But for now, as always, thank you so much for your time and hanging out here with me on the channel. It really does mean a lot to me. Have a tremendous day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.